Okay, so now we've got the software installed, you may well have set it to the same setting I have. If you're using 2015, you'll notice there are some subtle changes. The first thing that may be different is I have a series of icons on here, which are just filters. But I want to just quickly remind you what we have with our different screen that we have here. Left hand side, this may be pulled quite a way across. This is the object list. All the objects currently in your scene are listed here, and you can search for them or you can select them, but we're not going to worry too much about that, so I'm just going to drag that as far to the left as I can to give me as much working usable space. We have 4 different viewports. You can right click into those viewports to select them. You can tell they're selected if you get the yellow box to go around them. You can click middle mouse to pan your camera around. You can scroll in using the middle mouse in and out, and you can also hold down Alt and middle mouse to rotate your camera. You can do this in any of the views, but notice how if it says left there, you can just be able to read that. It says left, and if I Alt and middle mouse to rotate, it will now change to orthographic. The way you can change these back, you can click on them and you can choose from the list. So that was front. It really doesn't matter which one's which. Actually, I think that was left. Doesn't matter which ones you choose, but I always recommend you have a top viewport, a left viewport, and a front viewport. The reason why this goes orthographic is because orthographic refers to a top-down view, something that doesn't have a vanishing point. Particularly good if you're looking at something that's going to carry on going forever, perhaps like a blueprint, where it would always be evenly spaced no matter how far away from your perspective an object is. I'm just going to set that back to front. Whereas perspective, this viewport here, and you can have multiple things that are perspective, and that is fine. You can have multiple perspective views, perhaps different perspectives, that's not a problem at all. But by default, the one in the bottom right hand corner is our perspective view. Perspective means there is a vanishing point and it will look far more natural. Different purposes for different things, though it is recommended that you use all of your viewports for different jobs. To maximize your viewports, bottom right hand corner, just above your clock on your screen, you have the maximize viewport toggle, the one that's there, which will maximize or minimize the currently selected viewport. I do recommend you use right click to go into different tabs, different viewports. We also have on the right hand side our primitive selection. So what we can do here is select, this is basically where we can do any of our modification or any of our creation. Just as a bit of a guide for what the different tabs do, at the very top there, your primary tabs, we're going to be using just the create one for this video. We also then have different things that we can create. Geometry. I hope by now you will know the difference between geometry and shapes. I will be asking in lesson. We have lights, we have cameras, we have helpers, we have space warps, and we have more advanced systems. But inside of these brackets, inside of these columns, then we have additional properties. So geometry has a series of different types of geometry that we can use. You won't have the one at the bottom, yours will probably stop at stairs. But the standard primitives, we have boxes. Remember the way you create a box? Click, drag, let go, up, click. Again, there's 3 different properties in there. The first click and drag is deciding the first 2 properties, and then the third click and drag is deciding the third property. Again, you can zoom out, or if you ever get completely lost on screen, you can't find your object, you can press Z on your keyboard to go back to the currently selected object. If you can't select your object because you've clicked off somewhere, this is where the navigation pane on the left hand side comes in useful. You can click on your object from there, which will select it in the editor, then you can press Z to navigate to it should you need to. But I don't tend to use that, so I tend to have it minimized for when I need it. More visual real estate or screen space to work on. So we have the different objects we can create. Don't forget that your objects are created wherever the floor is on your scene. When I say floor, I mean this 2-dimensional grid that you can see there. And the grid is relative depending on which viewport you're looking at. It's always at the bottom from your perspective, whichever view you're looking in. So even though I'm going to move over away from the grid, the floor is still there, and I can see that in this front viewport. I'm using the black line as the guide to my floor. My sphere will appear halfway through the floor. That is because its point of origin, its point of rotation is in the center, whereas for this box and for these teapots, their point of origin is at the base, so we get slightly different results. If you create an object in different viewports, so I'm going to create one in the front viewport. Now if I make a cylinder, I want you to notice how I'm creating it in the front viewport, though I'm looking at perspective and I'm looking at top to see what's actually going on. I can go downwards, which will give me negative numbers on the right hand side here. You can just see my cursor where the values are changing, or I can move up to give me positive values. Just notice the difference that will have on where your point of origin is, which comes important later when we're doing linking and hierarchy. But do you see how that's created the point of origin flat from the point of reference from when I created the object? So when the front viewport was selected, its back was this axis here. I'm pointing at the monitor, that's not really going to help, but that axis that we've got here from the top perspective created it there. You have move, rotate, and scale tools. These are the key transform tools. That's the key important word to put in your assignment 1. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I would put that word in there somewhere. Transform, move, rotate, and scale. W is the keyboard shortcut for move. E and R for those as well. Move, rotate, and scale. One of the key skills that I've shown you so far and hope you're in the habit of is for any of your objects, whenever you create your starting object, I want you to go to the move panel, right click on it, and then put it into the center of your world. The point of origin for the center of your world is 0, 0, 0, and I encourage you to do that. Put it into the middle of your world, 0, 0, 0. I also want you to get in the habit of using your numpad if you've forgotten by now, 0 tab, 0 tab, 0 tab. You can also, by clicking on the different tools, keeps the box open, but you see how it's now the rotate box. Click back on move, it's the move box, scale, it's the scale box. So you don't always have to right click on them to bring the different tools up. You can just left click on them to select them. You also have your gizmo, which you can click on each axis, and you can translate your gizmo, or you can rotate your gizmo so it's relative to the object or to the world or to the view. So I've just rotated this box here, and I've got my gizmo, my X, Y, Z axes. You'll notice when I hover over a different axis it will highlight, and also the tiny little sub gizmo in the middle will change to say which axis you are going to rotate around. So in that case the Y axis, the X axis, and the Z axis. They do use this colour scheme to identify the different axes. Green is Y, then we've got red for X, and then Z is blue. But sometimes you don't want to rotate it around those axes. Perhaps you want to rotate it around the way it's now rotated. When we did the tank tutorial in class, this is a particular good example. If you want to rotate around its object, you need to rotate or move local to that object. So this is an important thing. Next to the transform tool, move, rotate, scale, I don't think you will have this icon here. You will go straight into this option here. View, change it for local. And did you just see how the gizmo rotated to be relative to the object? So now if I rotate it, it rotates around its point of origin. Well, it rotates around its axes rather than the world's axes or the view's axes. I can, however, change that back to view, and it will now go back to using the view's axes. Really important that you're comfortable using that tool. The other thing that I want to show you is very quickly how you can create multiple different objects within the scene. So we're going to look at, you can have multiple different properties. Extended primitives are a great way of creating extra detail without having to do very much. A chamfer box is a wonderful type of box because it is a box with an additional property that you can round the edge, you can chamfer the edge. In the modify panel, I call it the blue rainbow, you modify, you can then change those properties. And do remember, I strongly encourage that you use round numbers or whole numbers where possible. So 92 for my purposes is close enough to 90. Width 79.9 odd is close enough to 80. Height of 43 is close enough to 45. Remember that you can click on these up and down arrows to get approximate values. And then once you're happy with the value, round it out. And again, if this were to be the starting object that I'm going to work with, I would start at 0, 0, 0 and position that there. The reason why I do position it there is I've now got equal spacing on the left, on the right, on the front and on the back. So if I wanted to position things manually, I could easily just work out the numbers to position things relative to this. The other skills I want to show you while we're at this point is how you can move something's point of origin. So currently if I rotate this box, it will rotate around the bottom, which perhaps I don't want. Perhaps I want it to rotate around the midpoint. To do that, you can go to the Hierarchy tab, which is next to Modify and between Motion. Hierarchy tab, Effect Pivot Only, and then you can move or translate your pivot in any way that you like. So perhaps I want that there. You can position it as you like. I encourage you to use the other viewports if you're going to eyeball this to make sure it's still nice and square. Remember, if you hover over one axis, it will lock it on that axis. No matter how much I move my cursor left and right, it will only move up and down, because I'd locked it on the Y just by hovering over it. If I hover over the Z, it will do the same thing. I can no longer move up and down, I can only move on the X axis. Remember, Control and Z if you make a mistake. Turn off Effect Pivot Only, and now it will rotate around that point rather than the bottom point that we had before. If you want to modify it again, you can use the Modify panel, which is the blue rainbow, and then if you go to the create, you get all of your create options. And if you haven't yet had an opportunity to experiment with these different objects, I strongly encourage that you do. If you're trying to make a house, well, it just so happens door, windows, and walls are all built in. In the case of walls, it's kind of tucked away under AEC Extended, but you have walls. And escape to say that you didn't. Oh, you're trying to create some trees? Okay, foliage, big tree, big tree, big tree. There we go. A lot of power in here, and we're going to show a little bit more with modifiers with the next video.